So I should say start by expressing my gratitude to the organizers of this event for inviting me and for giving me a chance to summarize also my thoughts and to also present or respond to various ideas that revolve around this, that I've heard in recent times around this issue of relationship between architecture practice, architectural history, and also clearly what I understand that what organizers have meant by inviting me. They know that I've been involved in the classical movement for 30, 40 years. So I see things from a very specific perspective, and now this fact that as of recent time I've been even teaching classical studio in Trondheim at NTNU is obviously requires people associate this with history and what we can learn from history. So that's my topic. And I will talk in a very specific way. I will try to address a whole series of misconceptions that exist about classicism in that case, and it's in the relationship of architecture and history through that most significant, let's say, way of approaching architecture through historical lens. That's how people see it. And I will start first with maybe the first common prejudice, misconception that I'm actually grateful to Kai for alerting me that it's been now repeated a couple of times. And that's the idea that classicism is about facade design. That it's just, you just put columns on the facade, you know how to put the ornaments, and everything will be fine, and everyone will be happy. And I'm not blaming people who think so, because in classical movement, we used to think so in the, let's say, 1980s. The problem is, and we had to learn that this actually, it's not wrong, it just cannot be done, basically. What happens is if you try to do this, if you try to take a building like a modernist building and put classical ornamentation on the facade, you will not get a classical building, you will get a postmodernist building, most likely, or something that looks like postmodernism. And that's something we had to learn. We had to learn since when people realized that postmodernism failed, then a group of us in those days turned to looking what really classical design is. And we had to learn that it's primarily and in the first place about spatial composition. The composition of spaces, how spaces are internally composed, how they're connected, how they're proportioned, what happens if you move from one space to another, where the light comes from, what happens with ceilings. Obviously, we are not talking anymore about flat ceilings, but ceilings that can be of different heights and different shapes. And this was first breakthrough that came out. Let's say, I will just give you some examples, because I think that when I talk to architects, Krier brothers were the first to really notice this and approach design with this way. And what you get here are spaces, buildings, plans that first oppose the open plan. Open plan is the big opponent. That's something that was rejected. And the second thing is, in this design, you fight always. You try to avoid leftover spaces. So I'm just giving you some examples. Some of them are historical. The idea is that all spaces have to be formed. And this is the big opposition, let's say, to common principles of modernist design, where you have open plan as a very important issue, as a very important principle. This is a student's plan now, a gallery in Trondheim. And you can see that's the same thing from the entrance, this vestibule, the rotunda, monumental staircases. I haven't included now the other one. The next level, but it gives you the idea that the idea is really that spaces have to be formed. It's about forming spaces, and that's in the first place. This is an apartment block, very recent student project, and that one is, you can see, for instance, this apartment here in the front. You have the entrance vestibule, you have side corridors that have to be formed. You cannot just go and do just open plans. Open plan doesn't work in this. And what we have learned from this, that was like a very long process because we had to reconstruct how you proportion these rooms and so on. And indeed, nowadays, most of, like when you teach classical studio, most effort really goes into this, into resolving spatial composition. And then once you achieve this, then actually what happens is that facade becomes very often a very trivial issue, because once you've got the full control over spaces, over volumes, over masses, then really the issue whether you put columns, how you put them, what you do is an issue that's really how would they say, it follows somehow, very often, mostly it follows by its own logic. And so this is something that I wanted to say, is I'm just giving presenting this in order to respond to this misconception, very wide, that when we talk about classicism, we just talk about putting columns on the facade or putting ornaments on the facade, certain type of ornaments and so on. That's not true. You just can't do that. And clearly in that case, what we are talking about in the case of learning from history has been this long process that took us about 15 to 20 years to actually figure out. 15 years was really to realize how this, for instance, in the case of Palladio or in some other major classical architects, how these procedures were developed and done. And I would make a small digression here, just because I have to, in relation to this discussion about the veil ladder position and everything that is going on. I think that it would be good, once I've made this point, that it's not just about facades. I have to say, what we are now experiencing is, and this is what is this rise of interest in classicism. I've been now recently at a, semi-closed meeting, conference, or whatever, of us who have been in the classical movement for many decades, and considering how we go in this situation of increased interest for classicism and for traditional architecture. And I mean, what's going on is that we are all worried that we are going to experience maybe a tsunami of bad classical architecture in the next decade. What's going on is that there is an increased demand on one hand. On the other hand, there are too few architects who actually have been trained to do this, and architecture schools have not been really forthcoming in providing this education. And what is going on is that, I mean, in many schools, it's open discussion whether it should be suppressed, whether students who design it should be penalized even, or whatnot. I mean, I guess there are schools like that. And I always think it reminds me of the way Communist Party tried to suppress rock music sometime in the past, you know. And it's not going to work. But the real danger is that we get with the next 10 years a wave of bad classicism. That's really what may easily happen. So it is a concern. We've been talking about, obviously, we who are in the movement, we are concerned about how we provide education and all of that. But what I'm saying is, I want you just to take me as someone who has not just come to advocate a certain position or whatever, but to describe certain types of concerns and certain types of what is actually the issue. Now, the second misconception goes about classicism is a mystification. It's a kind of idea, okay, now classicists, they know secret rules, you know, like there are all of these secret rules and proportions and symmetries and how you compose and so on. And I've said it took us a long time to discover, so what is it that we were discovering? Like, it's something. Such rules don't exist. There's only one rule, and that rule is the building must look good, and it will look good if it's well composed. That's all. Everything else, those golden sections, harmonic proportions, symmetries, whatever, that will not help you if you don't look, it will not help the architect. If the architect doesn't look, if the architect does not apply visual judgment, if the architect does not think formally, if the architect does not visualize and think about it, does this look good or this does not look good? That's the bottom line. But what I'm saying is these rules will not help you. The only thing that can help you is to look, judge, and apply visual judgment. That's what is, and then obviously we get into this. What do we learn from history? Well, we learn from history if we apply such judgment, because through the past, architects have encountered similar or identical formal, visual, compositional problems. And that's what the classical architect tries to learn from the past. Not only good examples, but also failures. Why certain building did work, while certain building did not work. Santa Maria della Salute in Venice, well, it's not really good. It's a wonderful Baroque building, but it has a problem with a dark area of the altar, for instance, and so on. You have to be critical. You have to have critical relationship to the past buildings you analyze. You certainly cannot copy. You cannot copy because your building will be different, because your masses will be different, because your volumes will be different, because the moment you turn the corner, your detailing on the ornamentation of the facade will be different. You can't do that. But you can look how it was done in the past and see whether you have something to learn from it, and also very often it's what not to do as often as it is what to do. So that is... And now, one important thing that I think differentiates classicist from a modernist is not that you choose to use Doric, Ionic, Corinthian, whatever. The real difference is that you approach this learning from history without prejudice. A classicist is not supposed to have prejudice about the past, about this doesn't belong, this is not appropriate to our time, this is not for our society, forget about it. The only question is this building, this past building, this historical building, is it well composed? Is it good? Does it look good? What do I have to learn from it? That's all. And that's the only thing that matters, really. Now, that also explains this whole... That's what many people get disturbed. The use of the classic, many modernist architects get too disturbed when I talk with them about the use of classical orders on the facade, because that's what is Doric, Ionic, Corinthian, and whatnot. What are these orders? Essentially, what is going on is that through generations and generations, for let's say now 25 centuries at least, generations of architects have improved a little bit this ornament, added a little bit here, deducted a little bit there. These changes changed a little bit here, changed a little bit there. These changes were adopted or rejected by the next generation. So it's a purely evolutionary history of forms that evolved simply by so many top architects, so many talented eyes looked at these shapes. That's all that it is. And you can benefit from using them. You can benefit from changing them. Sometimes they were rather, at one moment in the Renaissance, they were rather rigidly standardized. But the real issue is what you do with them, and that has to depend on your judgment. Now, from this follows this story about the word tradition. Because obviously, if you're a classicist, you look at past buildings from the past, you look at these classical orders, you learn from them, and somehow you are a part of this, what people call the classical tradition. But it's a tricky word. And word tradition means a good number of things. And over years, I've learned actually to avoid it. Here is one misunderstanding about tradition. It goes like this: in various parts of the world, different traditions evolved. Different building practices evolved from different building practices, different traditions, and then people say, okay, now these traditions at a certain point, at a certain moment when they receive a certain level of sophistication, when they develop to a certain level of sophistication, we talk about their classical form. This is the moment when we say, okay, now this has really reached its classical form, and in that case, we will have, for instance, various classical architecture in various parts of the world, as we have different traditions. Different traditions evolved in different classical forms. Fair enough, and that's a reasonable way to look at it. But it overlooks, and this is the problem with this view, is a certain type of parochialism. And this is now the phenomenon. The phenomenon is that, namely, these traditions, they already start with very similar systems of forms, compositions, and so on. This is a Greek temple in Nantes. This is a marae, the community house of New Zealand Maoris. So even at the very early stages of development, traditions actually work with the same, very often with the same shapes, same structural systems, similar ways of doing things, and so on. As they develop further, they develop very often surprisingly similar developments, similar results. One thing that I was, for instance, completely shocked when I was in Mexico, in Teotihuacan. So this is 1,000 years before Columbus, or more, actually more. Mesoamerica, no interaction with Europe, but one goes there and one is shocked how much of these design solutions, these spatial ways of treating spaces and even ornaments coincide with European classical tradition. So how can it be? There is no, like, especially Mesoamerican architecture, you have symmetries, you have enfilades, you have principles of not putting the column in the middle. You have even some kind of Doric-looking columns. You know, like, I mean, what's going on here? You know, like, it's not. You cannot say this is influence, because there was no influence. Like, if this were in Central Asia or even in China, one would say, okay, someone traveled and transferred. There was no such thing. So Mesoamerican architecture in relation to European architecture is a particularly strong illustration of this fact that architecture is based everywhere in the world, is done by humans. It is based on a general universal human experience of space, of moving through space, of visually interacting with space, and ultimately what I believe also hardwired aesthetic judgments. The human brain, human mental capacities are in a certain way shared by all humans, more or less in various ways. It's not a racial issue, it's not ethnic issue, and they result in very often surprising architectural parallels that one cannot explain if one just says, if one just accepts this parochial view that, oh, there are different traditions and everything is different everywhere. It's true, but it's also different. These are different things, but still done by the same kind of being, which is the human being. So this universality of human, this humanist tradition that underlines classical tradition is something that's always very important, and in teaching and so on, you always have to emphasize that. So now we come to this issue of identity, and you see, like, this is again something that it is a danger, and it is probably one of major things that stand in front as an obstacle for architects who want to achieve quality in architecture, is if they base their decisions, their design decisions, not on visual formal considerations, not on what looks good, not on what is spatial formal quality of design, but on the desire to express, celebrate, and so on, identity. Now, this identity can be of different kinds. It can be It can be obviously ethnic, cultural, but it can be also belonging to the group of your colleagues, peers, architects, and so on. This is the moment when an architect chooses not to follow judgment of, is this building good, is this design good, does this look good, is it well composed, but does this building express, represent, and so on. Would it be satisfactory to the members of my group, sorry? Okay, I'll be. So this now becomes an issue, because it's primarily integrity that can produce good architecture. Identity is always a distraction from this. One has to look with open eyes, with willingness to consider formal visual aesthetic qualities in order to achieve formal visual aesthetic qualities. If you go for celebrating identity, your ethnicity, culture, the fact that you belong to the group of your peers as architects or whatever, if you try to please your peers, fine, you will achieve that. But in that case, obviously, concerns with aesthetic quality will become secondary. So this is now finally, I'm now concluding. So now we come, okay, now Branko, but you keep talking about this visual aesthetic quality and visual aesthetic judgment, and you base everything on visual aesthetic judgment, and you justify classicism by visual aesthetic judgment and so on. But how do we know? How can an architect know that his or her aesthetic judgment is right, correct? I mean, how can one know? You face, you look at proportions, you look at shapes, you look at volumes, but like, is this right or wrong? And the only answer is the same answer that one can give to a musician who wonders, how do I know, is this the right pitch, is this not the right pitch, are these tones, have I a singer who thinks, have I produced these tones right or wrong? And it's basically the musician must listen and judge, and an architect must look, visualize, imagine, judge, and evaluate. And that judgment is with you, or it is not with you. I hope it is with you, since you are architects, and since you are supposed to carry this Oslo in the next decades. And that's the only thing you have. No narrative, no story about golden section, no story about sustainability even. It's fine, buildings have to be sustainable, but that doesn't make them beautiful, or doesn't make them even visually tolerable. Aesthetic pollution is a major problem, and a building is visual. Because of visuality, a building is a public act. General public has the right to protest against visual pollution and against. So now, when I to conclude, the only advice I can give you is the one Le Corbusier would give you. And so let me just cite Le Corbusier in my final sentence. I urge you to open your eyes. So that's from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Branko.